All right, now that we're at a decent spot for our head, I'm going to move on to the body. And there's stuff that I might tweak out later on the face as I start adding more detail, but I want to get moving on this tutorial. Now that we know some things about retopology, it should make our workflow a little bit more smooth and efficient when we're kind of thinking about what our geometry is going to look like in the end. So I'm going to start by creating I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'm going to use the about 16 um, faces around the edge. I think this gives me enough to kind of work with without limiting me too much. And then I'm going to delete these top faces or these end caps. Um, and I like using cylinders because it's a simple enough shape that it allows me to kind of tweak out um, the geometry with enough detail, but I still have a lot of control over my quads and my faces. So then I do that by just using several edge loops and then kind of modifying it from there. So I'll do a couple edge loops and start kind of give me some areas to start scaling everything. And I am using a reference off my screen. So that's something to keep in mind. I wanted to have enough room on here so you can really see what I'm doing modeling wise. I think with figures and people, it's increasingly important than some of the other things to use reference. It's one of those things where I feel like when people look at it, we kind of are um, experts on what people should look like. So I think it's a little bit more picky about getting your proportions right than some other things that you might be modeling. So I'm just going to kind of rough everything out, like, work on my torso, um, and then maybe get um, some arms dialed in as well. Get the shoulder kind of roughly what I want. Let's add in another mesh for our arms as well. So what I'll do is I'll add the mirror modifier on it so I can reflect my work. And when you're creating a rig for something you're going to animate or you're going to add bones to actually rig, you have a couple options. You can either do like an A pose where the arms are kind of making this A type shape, or you can do a T pose where the arms are sticking straight out like a T. And I think there's advantages to both. The A pose tends to be more relaxed. What I like about the T pose is that you're kind of working in that 90-degree angle, which for modeling sometimes that can be a little bit easier, but don't feel like you're inclined to stay within that, right? When you actually start doing your rig, and we might do it here as well. After I kind of got my proportions lined up where I want, I might move these arms back and forth till I'm comfortable with what it is, and then maybe even adjust it into a T pose or an A pose later. So whatever, again, kind of makes the most sense to you. Also depends on if you're using someone else's rig. But I feel like, again, the advantages are like just build, like being able to build with this, horizontal method rather than having to model at an angle. Again, just throwing edge loops in here. And then let's go ahead and shrink that down. The same thing here. And I might even go a little bit longer on the arms. And again, use reference. Even if you're doing something stylized, I feel like having the foundations is a great starting point. Um, so what I can do too is I can always take this object um, and duplicate it for my legs. I could create a new cylinder, but just copy paste sometimes is quicker. Again, I'll kind of move these around as I need them, but first starting off with this 90-degree angles just to make it easy to move. Yeah, maybe when I actually have it in like the more of a rest pose or an A pose, I might then decide that I'll connect it just to kind of give it a better visual. But for now, I'll just kind of keep moving forward as separate. Like it's better getting everything else kind of fleshed out. Um, Before you start combining everything. I'm already thinking that maybe I have too much geometry in the arms, but that's okay. We can always dial that back as we need it. Let's go. All right, so let's add some fingers. And then I'm going to switch it up by adding, instead of 16, I'm going to reduce it down to about 10 on my cylinder. So, and I'm kind of always changing it up a little bit and kind of adjusting my shapes every time I do it. But I feel like 10 is kind of my new favorite number right now as far as like how they line up. And you'll see here in a second why that is. Let's go ahead and rotate that. And then they can sometimes be tricky when you want to connect your different parts together. And again, like I'm always kind of playing around with the numbers and what works best for me might not work best for you. Depends on the style. That's very tweaked out. And there's different ways too. You can kind of reduce these quads so they line up like this 4 to like 2. Really what makes the most sense to you, but also keep in mind how things are going to articulate and what shapes are going to kind of drawn out. I kind of like being able to have uh, almost like these knuckle type shapes too. Last thing I want to do is I want to model the inside of the mouth. And that will give us a backdrop for when the mouth is opening and closing. We'll worry about the teeth later, but let's at least get the mouth or the inside of the mouth dialed in. I'm going to do that by selecting the inside couple rows here. And then let's go ahead and make sure we can kind of see what's going on. And I'll go ahead and extrude this in a little bit. And then as it kind of comes in, let's make it bigger, just to kind of, again, add a little bit of room for our teeth. And I could even switch over to inside now, make it a little bit easier. I really just want to create some sort of backdrop that will kind of hide this empty hole that's within the. And if you wanted to, you could probably model the teeth ahead of time, or at least some sort of space, kind of help you with the size and the scale. But it's kind of this balance of enough space that it'll hold the teeth and kind of act as backdrop, but not overlap any of the extra skin as like they're kind of talking and moving. So. And let's go ahead and extend this down. Rotate it so we can start falling down the throat. Just enough. That looks pretty decent. Let's go to add another edge loop to the lips and go ahead and shrink down the lips. So at this point, I have a fairly decent low poly build for my character. I left the subsurface modifier off just so you can kind of see, really what my geometry looks like at this point. The next step will add a multi-resolution modifier and kind of show different versions and allow us to change the resolution at different stages. Now, a couple of things I did want to point out is certain things that I kind of skipped, right? Like I didn't add the toes on this because I'm going to be having my avatar wearing shoes. And then making sure I have more detail around the areas that are going to show and bend, making sure that, certain areas like around the fingers, the knuckles, that I have enough edge loops in there. I like to kind of put one on each side of where something's going to bend. So kind of keep that in mind. And you'll notice that too with the face. Again, we'll have a lot more going on than some of the body parts where some of this will definitely be hidden by clothing. So let's take a look in the next video at a multi-resolution modifier.